There is a number painted on a federal inspection report that most of the millions of people who make this drive every year will never see. 49.1 out of 100. That is the current sufficiency rating of the bridge you are about to cross, and any number under 50 qualifies a bridge for federal emergency replacement funding. You will not see a sign for it. What you will see, if you look down at the pavement instead of out at the water, is a single strip of yellow paint. That paint is the only thing separating your car from the one coming towards you at 55 miles an hour. For 6.79 miles, with the Atlantic Ocean on one side and Florida Bay on the other, and nowhere at all to go if either of you drifts. This is the Overseas Highway. It carries U.S. Route 1 for 113 miles from the edge of the Everglades to the last building in Key West, and for most of that distance, it is the only way in and the only way out. Along the way, small green mile marker posts count down from 127 to 0, and locals give directions by those numbers instead of street names. Because out here, the highway is the only address that matters. Before you go any further, it helps to know who else is watching. If you are driving this road right now, or you have driven it before, tell me where you are watching from in the comments, because I want to know how many of you have actually felt that yellow line under your tires. And if roads like this one interest you, the kind that were never supposed to exist and still don't quite feel safe, subscribe to Hollow Route Files, because we go looking for every one of them. Now, back to the water. To understand why this highway kills people, you have to understand that it was never really designed. It was inherited. At the turn of the 20th century, the railroad tycoon Henry Flagler set out to extend his Florida East Coast Railway from Miami all the way to Key West, across more than 100 miles of open water and Mangrove Island. It was called Flagler's Folly by the engineers who doubted it could be done. It took roughly 7 years, cost an estimated $50 million. And killed an unknown number of the laborers who built it, through drowning, disease, and at least 2 hurricanes that struck the work camps directly. The line opened in January of 1912. Flagler died the following year. The railroad lasted 23 years. On Labor Day, September the 2nd, 1935, a Category 5 hurricane, the most powerful ever recorded to make landfall in the United States at that time, came ashore near Long Key with sustained wind speeds estimated at 185 miles per hour. A relief train sent to evacuate World War I veterans working on highway construction camps in the Keys arrived too late and was swept from the tracks by a storm surge estimated at 18 to 20 feet. More than 400 people died, many of them the veterans the train had been sent to save. Barometric pressure readings taken at the time put the storm among the most intense ever measured in the Western Hemisphere to that point. A monument to those victims still stands near mile marker 82, close enough to the highway that you could see it from your car window if you knew to look. A reminder that the road beneath your tires exists at all only because the thing that came before it was destroyed in a single afternoon. The railroad never reopened. The state of Florida bought what was left of the right-of-way and the surviving bridges for $650,000 and spent 3 years converting a wrecked railroad into a 2-lane road. The Overseas Highway opened to automobile traffic in 1938. It has carried cars in one form or another ever since. Look at a map of the finished highway and you can still read the railroad underneath it. The road does not curve gently around the coastline the way most coastal highways do. It jumps, island to island, bridge to bridge, in the straight lines a rail bed demands. Because in most places, the engineers of the 1930s simply laid asphalt directly onto the old rail bed and reused the original bridge foundations wherever they could. Some of those original spans are still visible today, standing beside their modern replacements, cut off at both ends, going nowhere, kept only because a place like Pigeon Key, once a work camp for the railroad's laborers, is now a museum you can walk out to on a fragment of the original early 1900s railroad bridge. Speed limits along the corridor swing from 55 miles an hour on the open causeways down to 35 or even 30 through the small commercial stretches of Key Largo, Islamorada, and Marathon, and the shift happens with little warning, in a landscape where every mile looks, at a glance, much like the one before it. That history matters because it explains the road's central design flaw, the one that will come up again and again in this video. This is a highway built on the skeleton of a railroad. Railroads do not need passing lanes, breakdown shoulders, or a barrier between opposing tracks, because trains do not pass each other on the same rail. Cars do. And for most of the overseas highway's history, especially on its bridges, they have done it with nothing but paint standing between them. The signature structure of this road, the one that appears in half the postcards and movie posters ever shot in the Florida Keys, is the 7-mile bridge. It is not actually 7 miles. The current span, completed in 1982, runs 6.79 miles from Knights Key near Marathon to Little Duck Key, and near its center it rises in a long arc to a height of 65 feet, just tall enough to let boats pass beneath it. For most of its length, it sits far closer to the water. It carries 2 lanes of traffic, one in each direction, and for decades it has carried them with no physical median. No guardrail between opposing lanes, nothing but a painted double yellow line and the assumption that every driver crossing it will stay exactly where they are supposed to be. There are physical reasons that assumption fails as often as it does, beyond simple driver error. Glare off open water at sunrise and sunset can blind a driver facing east or west for several seconds at a time. Precisely the seconds in which a car ahead might slow, merge, or drift. Afternoon thunderstorms common to South Florida in summer can turn a dry bridge deck slick within minutes, with no shoulder available to pull onto and wait it out. And the visual monotony of the crossing itself, 6 or 7 unbroken minutes of the same water, the same railing, the same horizon, is a documented contributor to highway hypnosis. The kind of inattentiveness that creeps in on long, featureless stretches of road even when a driver believes they are alert. None of these factors alone causes a fatal crash. Combined with a road that offers no barrier and no room for error, each of them raises the odds that an ordinary lapse becomes an irreversible one. That assumption fails often enough that the bridge has become one of the most studied stretches of dangerous roadway in the state. Locals have spent years petitioning Monroe County and the Florida Department of Transportation to install a median barrier and to make passing illegal on the bridge entirely, pointing to what one resident, in a letter to a local newspaper, called thousands of crashes and hundreds of fatalities since the current bridge opened. As of the most recent federal inspection, the bridge's sufficiency rating sits at 49.1, low enough that the Florida Department of Transportation has moved away from continued patch repairs and is now planning a full replacement, tentatively slated for around 2030, at an estimated cost of $677 million. The bridge you are driving across today cost roughly $42 million to build, in $1982 40 years ago. What has changed in the meantime is not the bridge. It is what happens on it. Let me tell you what happens on it. On a Wednesday night in April of 2013, at roughly 8:50 in the evening, A 79-year-old man named Floyd DeVos was driving south across the 7-mile bridge with his 76-year-old wife Nancy beside him. They were headed home to Grand Rapids, Michigan at the end of a Florida trip. Heading north in the opposite lane was 23-year-old Xavier Yaikaza of Golden Beach, Florida, according to the Florida Highway Patrol. Yaikaza's car crossed into the southbound lane and struck the DeVos vehicle head-on. Floyd DeVos' Chevrolet spun and came to rest against the bridge's west wall. Yaikaza's car slid north, struck the east wall, and caught fire. 2 Monroe County Sheriff's deputies pulled Yaikaza from the burning vehicle before he was badly injured. Floyd DeVos died at the scene. His wife was flown to a Miami trauma center in critical condition. Yaikaza, hospitalized in critical condition as well, was later found to have alcohol as a factor in the crash, according to investigators. The bridge was closed in both directions for 3 hours while crews worked the scene, a stretch of concrete and railroad rail hanging 7 miles over open water, with nowhere for anyone to go around it. 9 years later, in the early morning hours of Monday, July the 18th, 2022, a family was driving home to the mainland after a weekend in the Keys. They had split into 2 vehicles, a Jeep and a Volkswagen Tiguan. In the Tiguan was 85-year-old Amparo Elena Huaman, a Peru-born grandmother who lived in Miramar, Florida, along with several family members, including her 15-year-old granddaughter. Behind them, on the same northbound stretch of the 7-mile bridge, a 43-year-old man named Mike Muthama was driving a Maserati Ghibli. According to the Florida Highway Patrol, Muthama attempted to pass the Tiguan and instead struck the rear of the car, sending it spinning into the southbound lane. Amparo Huaman was pronounced dead at the scene. Her granddaughter was airlifted to a children's hospital in Miami. Several other family members were taken to a hospital in Marathon. Muthama's Maserati struck a concrete barrier and caught fire. He walked away from the wreck largely unharmed. His blood alcohol level, according to investigators, was 0.17, more than twice the legal limit. He was arrested and charged with negligent manslaughter and multiple felony counts related to driving under the influence. 2 different decades, 2 different vehicles, 2 families who had done nothing wrong except be in the lane that somebody else drifted into. Both crashes happened at night. Both happened on a bridge with no barrier between opposing traffic. Both ended with fire. The pattern is not confined to the 7-mile bridge. Roughly 40 miles to the northeast, at mile marker 76 on Lower Metacom Key, a stretch of highway with no bridge at all, just 2 lanes of asphalt and a narrow paved shoulder, the same failure has played out. On a Tuesday night, according to the Florida Highway Patrol, a 30-year-old man from North Carolina was driving a Toyota Corolla north when he crossed into the southbound lane directly into the path of a Ford F-250 pickup truck driven by a 62-year-old Tennessee man. The pickup driver saw it coming and steered onto the shoulder, trying to buy room that the road simply did not have. It was not enough. The front corner of the Corolla struck the front of the truck. The Corolla's driver and his 23-year-old passenger both died on the highway. Everyone in both vehicles was wearing a seatbelt. It did not matter. In a head-on collision at highway speed, a seatbelt keeps you attached to the car. It cannot keep the car from folding. The road stayed closed for 6 hours while investigators worked the scene, the only route in or out of the Keys blocked by the same kind of crash, on a completely different part of the highway, with no bridge and no water involved at all. That is the part worth sitting with. This is not a bridge problem. The bridges make the danger vivid, because there is water on either side and nowhere at all to recover. But the underlying failure, a two-lane road with a painted center line and drivers who cross it, shows up on dry causeways too, wherever the shoulder is too narrow to serve as an escape. 3 cases. 3 decades apart in the middle one, and less than a decade apart in the outer 2. Different vehicles, different ages, different reasons the line got crossed. Every one of them ends the same way. They are not outliers. They are the pattern. In March of 2025, a pickup truck heading south on the 7-mile bridge crossed into the northbound lane and struck an SUV head-on, sending 3 people to the hospital by helicopter. Investigators told reporters afterward that they could not say why the truck's driver had crossed the center line. It is by now the most common sentence in every incident report written about this bridge. For unknown reasons, the vehicle entered the opposing lane. Monroe County's own crash data tells the wider story. In 2023 alone, the county recorded 1,401 crashes and 18 deaths on its roadways. The following year, 2024, the county logged over 1,700 crashes. This is a jurisdiction with a full-time population smaller than many single American neighborhoods, carrying that volume of wreckage on one narrow 2-lane road. If you want to know how this road ranks against the rest of the country, several independent transportation studies have tried to answer that question, and none of the answers are flattering. A 2017 analysis by the vehicle tracking company Geotab, using a decade of federal crash data weighted against traffic volume, ranked Florida's stretch of U.S. Route 1, including the Overseas Highway, as the deadliest highway corridor in the United States, ahead of every interstate in the country. Later research tracking deaths on Florida's US 1 between 2015 and 2019 counted 87 fatalities along the route, placing it among the 2 or 3 deadliest stretches of roadway in America, depending on the study cited. These figures cover the length of Florida's US 1, not the Overseas Highway alone, but the southern end, the part that runs on bridges over open water with no shoulder and no barrier, is consistently the section investigators and journalists point to first. A separate ranking compiled by the fleet data firm Find By Plate from a decade of federal crash and fatality figures placed Florida's U.S. 1 corridor second only to a stretch of Interstate 5 in California among the deadliest roads in the entire country, and singled out the ocean bridges connecting Miami to the Florida Keys as one of the specific reasons drivers struggle to navigate the route safely. However you slice the data, by federal agency, by private analytics firm, or by county sheriff's office, the conclusion does not change. If you are still with me, you have made it about halfway through this story, and I want to ask you the same thing I always ask around this point. Subscribe to Hollow Route Files if a road like this one is exactly the kind of thing you come here for, because we are only getting into the harder part of it now. This road does not just kill people in isolated accidents. It kills them in a specific, repeatable way, and once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it every time you drive across a bridge with nothing but a painted line beside you. Here is the pattern, laid out plainly. Almost every serious or fatal crash on the 7-mile bridge, and on many of the other 41 bridges that make up this highway, follows the same shape. A driver, usually at night, either attempts to pass a slower vehicle on a 2-lane bridge with no legal passing restriction, or simply drifts, distracted, fatigued, or impaired, across a center line marked only in paint. There is no barrier to stop the vehicle before it reaches the opposing lane. There is no shoulder to escape onto. There is only the width of a single traffic lane and, beyond that, a concrete wall or open water. The crash that follows is almost always a head-on collision, and head-on collisions at highway speed are among the most survivable sounding and least survivable crash types there are. Impairment shows up again and again in the record. In April of 2024, near mile marker 87 in Islamorada, a 26-year-old Minnesota woman slammed into a parked Monroe County Sheriff's cruiser at full speed while a deputy was standing beside it on a traffic stop. According to authorities, her blood alcohol content was 0.310, nearly 4 times the legal limit. The deputy was airlifted to a hospital with serious injuries and survived. It is one incident among many, but it illustrates something the fatal crash is due to. On a road this narrow with drivers this impaired, the margin between a frightening headline and a funeral is often nothing more than luck and a few feet of pavement. The road's builders did not design for this, because the road was never really built to be a highway. It was built to be a railroad, and it kept the bones of a railroad, narrow, straight, unforgiving of error, designed for a kind of traffic that never leaves its own track. Add 60, 70, 80 years of automobile traffic to that skeleton. Multiply it by the tourist volume of one of the most visited destinations in the country, and you get a road where the margin for error on some stretches is 1.5 feet of paint. There is a second danger built into this highway that has nothing to do with any single crash, and it is the reason officials talk about this road differently than they talk about almost any other in Florida. U.S. Route 1 is not just how you get into the Florida Keys. For the roughly 75,000 people who live there year-round, it is the only way out. State planning rules require Monroe County to be able to fully evacuate its permanent population within 24 hours, a number the state legislature voted in 2025 to extend to 24.5 hours. Ahead of any hurricane strong enough to trigger a mandatory evacuation, which in the Keys means anything Category 3 or stronger. There are no shelters in the Keys rated to withstand a storm above a Category 2. Everyone leaves, or everyone stays and hopes. And everyone who leaves does it on the same road you are driving on right now. The same narrow bridges, the same lanes divided by paint, funneling every car, camper, and box truck in the island chain north through a single choke point toward the mainland. In September of 2017, Hurricane Irma made landfall directly over Cudjoe Key in the lower Keys as a Category 4 storm with sustained winds of 130 miles per hour. In the aftermath, emergency officials could not simply reopen the highway. Every one of the highway's 42 bridges had to be individually inspected for structural damage before authorities would allow residents back across them. For days, the road that is the only way in was also the only way anyone could be let back in, one careful bridge at a time. There is technically one alternate route, a second, smaller road called Card Sound Road that branches off north of Key Largo and rejoins US 1 near the county line. It is not really a solution. It runs for roughly 18 miles through mangrove wilderness with no services, no shoulder to speak of, and a 2-lane profile that has produced its own share of fatal multi-vehicle crashes. When one of the two roads closes, whether for a routine crash investigation or a hurricane inspection, every driver in the Keys funnels onto whichever one remains. And the 18-mile stretch of US 1 north of Key Largo, the section locals simply call the 18-mile stretch, becomes the entire bottleneck for the whole island chain. There is no version of this geography where a serious incident on the highway is a minor inconvenience. It is always, for however many hours it lasts, the only door in or out. So this is a road with two separate identities layered on top of each other. On an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, it is one of the most scenic drives in North America. Water on both sides. The kind of view that ends up in every tourism commercial Florida has ever made. Under specific, predictable and recurring conditions at night, in the rain, behind a driver who has had too much to drink or too little sleep. On a bridge with no barrier between you and the oncoming lane, it becomes something else entirely. The state knows this. That is why the 7-mile bridge is currently the subject of an active federal planning study. Why officials have already concluded that patch repairs are no longer sufficient, and why a full replacement, budgeted at more than 15 times the cost of the bridge currently under your tires, is now moving through the design process. Public meetings held by the Florida Department of Transportation have specifically discussed whether the next bridge should include a barrier-separated path and improved lane protection, the exact features the current bridge has lacked for more than 40 years. Officials have also acknowledged that any solution has to account for the bridge's role as an evacuation route, not just a scenic drive, which means widening or redesigning it without ever fully closing the only road out of the lower Keys. None of that will be finished for years. Until then, the 6.79 miles between Marathon and Little Duck Key remain exactly what they have been since 1982: 2 lanes, 1 line of paint, and whatever judgment the driver coming toward you happens to be exercising that night. If you plan to make this drive yourself, and most people who watch this channel eventually do, because the Keys really are worth seeing, here is what more than 80 years of crash reports on this road actually teach you. Cross the bridges in daylight if you have any choice in the matter. Nearly every serious crash documented on this stretch happened after dark, when a distant headlight is the only warning you get, and a drifting car is nearly impossible to judge until it is already in your lane. Do not attempt to pass another vehicle anywhere on a 2-lane bridge or narrow causeway, no matter how slow the car ahead of you is moving or how open the road looks. The width you think you have is smaller than it appears, and there is no shoulder to correct into if you are wrong. Build in more time than the map promises, because a single crash anywhere along this highway, on a bridge or on dry land, can close the only road for hours and leave you with nowhere else to go. And assume that every oncoming headlight belongs to a driver who might drift, might be tired, might be impaired. Because on this particular stretch of American road, often enough, one of them will. The number is still 49.1 out of 100. It will keep ticking downward, inspection by inspection, until a new bridge finally replaces the one you are on, sometime near the start of the next decade. The water on either side of you will look exactly the way it does in every photograph anyone has ever taken of this drive: turquoise and impossibly clear. The reason the Florida Keys log more than 4 million overnight visitor trips a year. That view is real. So is the yellow line. Until the new bridge is built, the only thing standing between you and the car heading toward you, mile after mile over some of the most beautiful water in the country, is a strip of paint about 4 inches wide, and the good judgment of a stranger you will never meet. Drive it in daylight if you can. Give the car ahead of you room. And tell me in the comments if you have made this drive before, and whether you notice the line the way you will the next time you cross it.